Well, another contributor to tonight's seminar was Professor Gavin McCrone, whose 1974 report on Scottish independence was, as you saw in Reeville's report, buried by the then government. 38 years on, he's written another report for tonight's seminar. I asked him first what he'd concluded in 1974 would be the difference made by oil to the nation's finances.
Oh, it would have made a huge difference. Well, it did make a huge difference. The oil price was very high then, and the potential oil revenues were very large, and they were greatly underestimated by the then Conservative government. I wrote that paper, which you refer to, which seems to become a bit notorious, in the interlude between the Conservative government and the Labour government coming in, and it was really in the form of briefing for the incoming ministers.
And that report was not made public, was it? It took decades for it to come to light.
Well,
should it have been published at the time?
No, because it was, I mean, when civil servants write briefs for ministers, they're confidential for the purpose for which they're written. And so it wasn't intended to be published. And it was quite right that it wasn't published at the time. Actually, most of the information which I gathered and put into that report was already available in various sources. The Observer newspaper had been running a couple of editions on it in successive Sundays, which had argued that the oil revenues were going to be much larger than was then imagined, and that was what I concluded in my paper.
Right. That was then. What about now? Today's report from the Institute for Fiscal Studies seems to paint a different picture. For you, how have things changed since then?
Well, the position has changed enormously since then. I mean, the oil has run down quite a bit since then. It's not, the peak of oil production was about 1999. The oil price collapsed in the mid-1980s and has only recently begun to recover, but it's not, I think, up to, I mean, the oil revenues are nothing like as large now as they would have been in real terms in the early 1980s.
There are still more than 2 billion barrels of oil under the North Sea, it is said.
That's right.
It'll last for another 40 years.
Yes, probably.
Does that strengthen or weaken the case for Scottish independence based on full revenue from that oil?
I think at the moment what came out very clearly from the IFS contribution to today's discussions, something that we knew already really, was that Scotland pays its fair share of taxation to the UK Exchequer, but the level of public expenditure per head in Scotland is about £1,000 higher than the UK average, so that Scotland's contribution without oil is not sufficient to pay for the level of public expenditure. The oil more or less makes up the difference at the moment.
That being the case, where does that leave the debate about the state of Scotland's finances?
Well, the trouble is that oil is very volatile as a source of revenue. I mean, it has varied between about £1 billion a year and £12 billion a year. And nobody knows quite what it's going to do in the future. We expect that the oil price may stay pretty high, but it may not, on the other hand, because with the exploitation of shale gas and these other things that are now happening, it is possible that there could be a drop in the oil price. And so if Scotland was depending wholly on the revenue from oil to make up the gap in its difference between tax revenue and public expenditure, then that's a very volatile source, and it would be unwise to depend on it wholly.
And we know ultimately that oil and gas will run out, that is certain.
Yes, they will eventually. And even if they last for a long time, we will be exploiting resources which are more and more difficult to get, and therefore the profit and the taxation will be reduced on them, even if the output keeps up for a long time.
And when we look to countries like Norway and Middle Eastern countries which have large sovereign wealth funds based on oil wealth, is that something that Scotland could do, even now?
It's something that should have been done, in my opinion, and I argued for that in the 1970s. If we had put aside a proportion of the oil revenues that came in, the whole financial position of the UK would be a lot stronger than it is now. As to whether Scotland could do that in the future, well, the problem is that the oil revenues would be needed, if Scotland became independent, the oil revenues would be needed in the first instance to finance the current expenditure budget. Now, it may be possible at some point in the future to cream some of that off and put it into an oil fund, but that would only be possible if one was prepared either to cut public expenditure or increase other taxes, or alternatively, somehow, to achieve a much faster rate of economic growth.
Do you think Scotland could go it alone?
Oh, it certainly could go it alone. I don't think that's ever been in doubt. The question really is, what would the problems be that we would have to face?
Would it be better off?
Well, I personally don't think it would be better off. I mean, you really don't quite know how it would be, because there would be all sorts of unknowns, like, you know, if Scotland was raising public debt, for example, which it would have to do, what rate of interest would it have to pay? We don't know. If there was had to be set up a separate central bank, what would that cost? All these kind of questions, which we don't know at the moment. So it's really very difficult to arrive at a firm view about how well off Scotland would be as an independent country. But it seems to me very unlikely it would be better off.
There we must leave it. Professor, many thanks for that.
Righto. Thank you very much.